The Mojave Desert does not forgive weakness. When the temperature hits 112 degrees Fahrenheit, the air stops feeling like oxygen and starts feeling like inhaled fire. The sun strips the moisture from your skin before you even realize you are sweating. In this desolate expanse of jagged rock and endless sand, a normal man would panic. A normal man would look at the 2 cheap plastic bottles of water and the crumpled $5 bill sitting in the dirt and realize he was looking at his own tombstone. But I am not a normal man, and the 2 people who had just abandoned me to die in the middle of a remote, unnamed canyon had made the most fatal miscalculation of their lives. My son Derek and his wife Vivian stood by their idling luxury SUV. Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched in a mixture of guilt and greed. It was Vivian who delivered the final ultimatum. "The transfer papers are in your briefcase back at the hotel," Richard, Vivian said, her voice completely devoid of empathy. She adjusted her designer sunglasses, looking at me as if I were a piece of broken machinery. "If you refuse to sign over the security firm, you can find your own way back to civilization. We'll tell the search and rescue teams you wandered off the trail. They might find your bones by next week." Derek finally looked up, his eyes flashing with a desperate, hollow kind of anger. "Just give us the company, Dad. You're 70 years old. You don't need $50 million. You don't need an empire. You're old and confused. Let it go or let the desert take you." He shifted the SUV into gear. The tires spun, kicking up a massive cloud of choking, blinding dust. I stood perfectly still, watching the vehicle shrink into a metallic speck on the horizon until the roar of the engine was swallowed by the howling desert wind. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect, untraceable murder. They believed they were leaving a fragile 70-year-old man to succumb to heatstroke and dehydration. What they didn't know was that 40 years ago, before I built Vanguard Tactical Security into a $50 million empire, I was a Tier 1 Special Forces survival instructor. I literally wrote the military SERI, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape manual for this exact quadrant of the Mojave. I looked down at the $5 bill and the 2 bottles of water. I didn't panic, I didn't scream, I smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They didn't realize they had just locked themselves inside a cage with a silverback. When a structure collapses, whether it's a building or a family, it rarely happens overnight. There are always microfractures, tiny warning signs that stress the foundation before the catastrophic failure. I spent my life training operatives to identify threats before they materialized. I knew how to read human behavior, how to spot the subtle shifts in baseline psychology that indicated deception. But the hardest deception to accept is the one sitting at your own dinner table. My late wife, Helen, and I had built Vanguard Tactical from the ground up. We started with nothing but my military pension and a profound understanding of threat assessment. We grew the company from a 2-person consulting firm into a global powerhouse providing cybersecurity, physical protection, and asset recovery for Fortune 500 companies. When Helen passed away 5 years ago, she left me with a massive fortune and our only son, Derek. I love Derek, but I had made a critical tactical error in raising him. I had shielded him from the hardship that forged my own discipline. I gave him the corner office, the 6-figure salary, and the illusion of power without ever forcing him to earn the scars of leadership. He grew soft, entitled, and easily manipulated, and then he met Vivian. Vivian was a masterpiece of social engineering. On the surface, she was a brilliant, highly educated corporate strategist who seemingly transformed Derek from a lazy executive into an ambitious visionary. But my instincts, honed by decades of hunting hostile intelligence operatives, screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with her. She was too polished, her background too perfectly curated. She never spoke of her childhood, her family, or her life before she arrived in our city. The first undeniable crack in their facade appeared 3 months before they abandoned me in the desert. It was a Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my secure home office, reviewing the quarterly financial logs for Vanguard's subsidiary accounts. I noticed a series of bizarre, highly sophisticated anomalies. Someone had bypassed our internal security protocols and initiated a massive data hemorrhage. They were quietly copying Vanguard's most sensitive client lists, proprietary encryption algorithms, and deployment strategies, funneling the data into an encrypted, untraceable offshore server. An amateur would have raised the alarm, locked down the servers, and initiated a witch hunt. But I am not an amateur. When you discover a mole, You don't kill them immediately. You feed them disinformation, you monitor their communications, and you wait for them to lead you back to their handler. I activated a dormant shadow-level surveillance protocol on my own company's network, a protocol only I knew existed. Within 48 hours, I had traced the origin of the data breach. The breach had originated from Derek's home IP address. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own son was stealing the lifeblood of the company his mother had died helping me build. But as I dug deeper, intercepting the encrypted traffic flowing out of his house, I realized Derek wasn't the mastermind. He didn't possess the technical capability to bypass Vanguard's firewalls. The keystroke dynamics, the coding patterns, the sheer ruthlessness of the digital extraction, it all pointed to a highly trained professional. It pointed to Vivian. I didn't confront them, I didn't say a word. Instead, I began playing the role they desperately wanted me to play. I started acting like a confused, exhausted old man. I began forgetting appointments. I misplaced my keys. I asked Derek the same questions multiple times during board meetings. I watched the poorly concealed gleam of excitement in Vivian's eyes every time I stumbled over my words. They believed my cognitive decline was their golden ticket. To uncover the full extent of their conspiracy, I needed a physical asset inside their house. I needed eyes and ears where my digital surveillance couldn't reach. And the asset that provided the breakthrough was the last person I ever expected to recruit into a counter-espionage operation. My 15-year-old granddaughter, Maya. Maya was a brilliant, fiercely independent teenager who possessed my late wife's sharp intuition and my own natural suspicion of authority. She had always felt a subtle disconnect from her parents, often seeking refuge in my home to escape the sterile, superficial environment Vivian had cultivated. 2 weeks after I discovered the data breach, Maya showed up at my house unannounced. It was pouring rain and she looked terrified. She sat on my living room sofa, her hands trembling as she pulled a small digital audio recorder from her backpack. "Grandpa," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. "I think Mom is trying to hurt you." She explained that she had been hiding in the air vent above Derek's home office, a secret spot she used to read when her parents were arguing. She had overheard a conversation that chilled her to the bone. She hit play on the recorder. The audio was staticky, but the voices were unmistakable. "The extraction is almost complete," Vivian was saying, her tone cold and utterly professional, completely unlike her usual manufactured warmth. "We have the client lists, the encryption keys, and the deployment algorithms. Blackwatch Industries is prepared to wire the $50 million into the offshore account the moment Vanguard's assets are officially transferred to your name." "Vivian, this is insane," Derek replied, his voice laced with panic. "He's not just going to hand over the company, he's starting to ask questions about the subsidiary accounts. If he audits the main ledger, we're dead. He's an old man, Derek. His mind is failing." "He trusts you," Vivian scoffed, a cruel, mocking edge to her voice. "We take him on the family bonding hiking trip to the Mojave next weekend. We get him isolated, we demand the signature. If he refuses or if he realizes what we're doing, we just leave him there. The heat will solve our problem in 4 hours. The authorities will rule it a tragic accident due to cognitive decline, and as his sole heir, you inherit everything automatically. Blackwatch gets the tech, we get the money, and your father becomes a tragic memory." The recording ended. The silence in my living room was deafening. My own son was conspiring with a corporate spy to murder me and sell my company to a hostile rival. Vivian wasn't a loving wife. She was a highly trained intelligence asset planted by Blackwatch Industries to dismantle my empire from the inside. I looked at my granddaughter. Tears were streaming down her face. She had just realized that her mother was a predator, and her father was a willing accomplice to murder. I didn't offer her empty comfort. I offered her a mission. "Mai," I said, my voice steady, projecting absolute authority. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are going to go home, and you are going to act completely normal. You will not mention this recording to anyone. You are going to pack a small bag and tell your parents you are going on a school weekend retreat. Then, you will come straight to my secure safe house downtown. I will protect you. But right now, I need to build a trap." Maya wiped her tears, her spine straightening as the Vanguard blood running through her veins took over. She nodded once, a silent agreement to join the operation. The moment Maya was secure, I went to war. I didn't call the police. The authorities would tie everything up in bureaucratic red tape, and Vivian's corporate handlers would likely extract her before she could face a judge. I wanted something far more devastating than a simple arrest. I wanted absolute destruction, but before I laid the ultimate financial trap, I needed to destabilize them. In psychological warfare, you never let the enemy fight you on their own terms. You make them fight themselves. I knew Derek was weak, driven by greed but fundamentally cowardly. Vivian was the apex predator in their dynamic. To break them, I had to sever their trust. I initiated a series of untraceable phantom cyber attacks on Derek's personal financial infrastructure. It started small. His premium credit cards were suddenly flagged for fraud and locked. His cryptocurrency wallets, which he used to hide his illicit kickbacks from Vanguard contractors, experienced catastrophic routing errors, effectively freezing hundreds of thousands of dollars in a digital limbo. I watched through the hidden cameras I had discreetly installed in their home as Derek descended into a spiral of panic. He began pacing the living room at 3 a.m., drinking scotch straight from the bottle, terrified that the SEC or Vanguard's internal auditors were closing in. He begged Vivian to accelerate the timeline. Vivian, however, responded with icy contempt. She called him pathetic, a fragile liability who was cracking under the slightest pressure. The cracks in their alliance widened into massive fissures. They argued constantly, their voices echoing through the empty, sterile halls of their mansion. While they were tearing each other apart, I dug deeper into Vivian's past. Using a secure terminal I kept off the grid, I cross-referenced her biometric data, which I had lifted from a wine glass she left at my house against international intelligence databases. The results confirmed my worst suspicions. Vivian wasn't just a corporate spy, with undeniable, absolute clarity. Absolute clarity. Her real name was Elena Rostova, a highly trained corporate saboteur who had orchestrated the hostile takeovers of 3 major defense contractors in Europe. In 2 of those cases, the founding CEOs had died in highly suspicious, unresolved accidents, shortly before the acquisitions were finalized. She wasn't just planning to steal my company, she was planning to eliminate me permanently. The Mojave Desert trip wasn't a sudden inspiration, it was her signature move. The realization that my son had married a professional assassin and was willingly participating in my murder extinguished any lingering hesitation I felt. I armed myself, both legally and physically. I secured my physical perimeter, updated the ballistic glass in my vehicles, and began carrying a concealed firearm. Only after I had secured the physical threat did I move to the digital battlefield. I implemented a protocol I called the Dead Man's Switch. I hard-coded a highly complex biometric lockdown sequence deep into Vanguard's core servers. I linked the ownership transfer of the company to a specific security clearance algorithm. If Derek attempted to transfer the assets or access the proprietary data without my active biometric confirmation, a retinal scan and a voice print authorization, the system would immediately trigger a total quarantine. It would lock down every financial account, freeze every subsidiary asset, and initiate a massive data purge on Derek's local servers, destroying all the stolen files they had attempted to copy. More importantly, it would automatically forward the evidence of the corporate espionage, including Maya's audio recording and the network trace logs, directly to the FBI Cybercrimes Division and the SEC. I deliberately left a breadcrumb trail in the legal documents, suggesting that a simple physical signature on a specific transfer form was enough to bypass the security protocols and hand over the company. It was irresistible bait. It was the illusion of a shortcut, and I knew Vivian's arrogance would blind her to the reality of the trap. Everything was in place. When Derek and Vivian invited me on the Mojave hiking trip, claiming it would be good for my fading memory, I accepted with a convincing smile of gratitude. I allowed them to drive me into the desert. I allowed them to lead me deep into the unnamed canyon. I allowed them to make their demands, deliver their threats, and abandon me in the scorching heat. Because the moment their SUV disappeared over the horizon, the trap was officially sprung. Before I moved toward my extraction point, I decided to observe my executioners. In the Special Forces, you never assume the enemy has left the operational theater until you verify it visually. I scrambled up a steep, jagged ridge of obsidian rock, ignoring the searing heat radiating through the soles of my boots. From an elevated, concealed vantage point, I watched their SUV navigate the treacherous dirt road. They didn't drive away immediately. They stopped about a mile down the canyon. Through my compact tactical binoculars, I watched Derek step out of the vehicle. He looked physically ill, his shoulders slumped as he stared back toward where they had left me. For a fraction of a second, I thought he might turn the car around. I thought the conscience of the boy I had raised might override the greed of the man he had become. But then Vivian stepped out. She didn't look back. She walked to the edge of a deep ravine, holding my satellite phone, the one they had stolen from my bag during the drive. With a swift practice motion, she smashed the phone against a massive boulder, shattering the casing, and kicked the pieces into the abyss. She turned to Derek, grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, and shoved him back toward the driver's seat. She was ensuring there was no rescue, no communication, no hope. I watched the dust trail of their vehicle finally disappear over the horizon. The silence of the desert rushed back in, heavy and absolute. To a civilian, this environment is a death sentence. At 112 degrees, the human body begins to boil from the inside out. Your sweat evaporates instantly, leading to rapid silent dehydration. Within 2 hours, cognitive functions degrade, hallucinations begin. Within 4 hours, organ failure initiates, but to me, this harsh, unforgiving landscape was an old friend. I knew how to read the subtle shifts in the wind, how to navigate by the shadows cast by the sun, how to conserve energy by moving smoothly and deliberately. I recalled a mission in the Helmand province decades ago, where I had been separated from my unit and survived for 9 days behind enemy lines, with nothing but a combat knife and a broken canteen. The Mojave was just another sandbox. I began my trek to the east. I didn't drink the cheap water they had left me. I poured it over a bandana and tied it around my neck to cool my carotid arteries. I moved steadily, my mind completely clear, focused entirely on the mechanics of survival and the mathematics of my revenge. 2 miles later, I reached the designated rock formation. I stood in the 112-degree heat and kicked dirt over the $5 bill. I didn't need their cheap water bottles. I knew this canyon better than I knew the back of my own hand. 2 miles to the east, hidden beneath a rock formation I had marked 30 years ago, was an underground survival cache I maintained for extreme training exercises. It contained a satellite uplink, military-grade hydration packs, and a secure transport beacon. Within an hour, I was sitting in the air-conditioned cabin of a private extraction helicopter, watching the desert fade beneath me. While I was flying back to the city, Derek and Vivian were heading straight to Silicon Valley. They believed I was dead. They believed they had won. They had reserved a private dining room at a hyper-exclusive restaurant to celebrate their victory and finalize the illegal sale of my empire with the executives of Blackwatch Industries. They thought they were about to become millionaires. They had no idea they were walking into a financial massacre. The private dining room at the restaurant in Silicon Valley overlooked the glowing city skyline. Derek and Vivian sat across from the CEO of Blackwatch Industries, raising crystal glasses filled with $2,000 champagne. Derek looked nervously excited, shifting in his custom-tailored suit. Vivian was the picture of predatory confidence, her corporate mask firmly in place. To a seamless transition, the Blackwatch CEO toasted, raising his glass. "The $50 million will be wired into your Cayman accounts the moment the transfer signature clears our legal department." Derek produced the forged signature document, a document he had forced me to sign under the guise of authorizing a minor medical procedure a week earlier, which Vivian had expertly altered. He slid it across the table. "It's done," Vivian said smoothly. "Vanguard's proprietary tech is yours." The CEO smiled and signaled his chief financial officer, who sat at the end of the table with a secure laptop. The CFO began processing the massive wire transfer. Before the transfer was initiated, the CEO of Blackwatch leaned back in his leather chair, swirling his champagne. He was a man who thrived on corporate cruelty, and he couldn't resist gloating over his impending victory. "I have to admit, Derek," the CEO said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I never expected Vanguard to fall this easily. Your father built a fortress, but even the strongest fortresses fall when someone opens the gates from the inside. We've been analyzing Vanguard's proprietary algorithms for months. The encryption keys your father developed for the Department of Defense contracts. We already have buyers lined up in 3 foreign nations, willing to pay 9 figures for backdoor access." Derek shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. "The agreement was that Vanguard's core employees would be retained. You promised severance packages for the executive board." The CEO laughed, a sharp barking sound that echoed in the private dining room. "Severance packages? Derek, please, we're going to gut Vanguard. We're going to liquidate every physical asset. Terminate every employee who shows loyalty to your father's old regime, and sell the technology piece by piece to the highest bidder. Vanguard won't exist in 6 months. It will be a ghost. Vivian smiled, taking a sip of her champagne. It's just business, Derek. Don't be sentimental. You're getting $50 million. You can buy all the sentiment you want. Speaking of which, the CEO continued, looking at Vivian with profound admiration. Your work on this operation, Elena, has been nothing short of masterful. 2 years of deep cover, cultivating the asset, infiltrating the family structure, and identifying the exact psychological pressure points needed to eliminate the primary target without triggering a homicide investigation. It's brilliant. Your bonus for this acquisition will reflect your exceptional talent. Derek's head snapped up. Elena. Who is Elena? Vivian didn't even look at him. She just kept her eyes on the CEO. He doesn't need to know the details, Marcus. He just needs his payout so he can disappear. Derek suddenly realized the terrifying reality of his situation. He wasn't a partner in this endeavor. He was a disposable tool. He had betrayed his father, aided in his attempted murder, and sold his family's legacy, all to a woman who was using a fake name and a CEO who viewed him with absolute disgust. He opened his mouth to argue, to demand a larger share of the payout, to somehow reassert his authority, but the words died in his throat. His greed had trapped him, and he was too cowardly to fight his way out. Let's finalize this, the CEO said, waving a hand toward his chief financial officer. Initiate the wire transfer, empty Vanguard's primary holding accounts, and begin the data migration. The CFO nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard of the secure laptop. He projected his screen onto the large monitor, mounted on the dining room wall, wanting everyone to witness the final transaction. A green progress bar appeared on the screen, slowly ticking upward. 10%, 20%, the room fell silent, tension palpable as the digital theft of a $50 million empire progressed. Derek watched the screen with a mixture of terror and anticipation, his entire future riding on that loading bar. Vivian watched with cold, calculating satisfaction. 50%, 75%, almost the CFO murmured, verifying the forged biometric clearance token now. 90%, and then everything stopped. A piercing, high-pitched alarm suddenly began blaring from the laptop. The screen flashed blood red. The error code wasn't a standard banking rejection. It was a Vanguard tactical security quarantine alert. What is this? The CEO demanded, his smile vanishing instantly. The transfer is blocked. The network is rejecting the signature. It requires a live biometric authorization from Richard. Derek paled, panic bleeding into his voice. That's impossible. We bypassed the biometric locks last month. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the private dining room swung open. 2 heavily armed federal agents from the FBI Cyber Crimes Division stepped into the room, flanking the entrance. And then I walked in. I was wearing a pristine midnight blue tactical suit. My posture was perfectly straight, projecting the lethal authority of a Special Forces commander. I didn't look like a confused, dying old man who had been left to bake in the desert. I looked like the architect of their destruction. Derek's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face so quickly, I thought he might faint. Dad, you were in the desert. I was where I wanted to be, Derek, I said, my voice echoing coldly through the silent room. Did you really think the man who wrote the survival protocols for the United States military would die of thirst because you took away his Evian water? Vivian stood up, her predatory mask shattering into sheer terror. She looked wildly at the door, assessing her escape routes, but the federal agents blocked her path. Vivian, I said, turning my gaze to her, or whatever your real name is, your handler at Blackwatch should have warned you. You never attempt a hostile takeover of a security firm without checking for a dead man's switch. I pulled a small remote detonator-style device from my pocket and pressed a single button. The CFO's laptop screen shifted from red to black. A massive data purge sequence initiated. Every single proprietary file Derek and Vivian had stolen and transferred to the Blackwatch servers was simultaneously corrupted and permanently deleted. The encryption keys dissolved. Decades of Vanguard secrets were vaporized before their eyes. The data is gone, the CFO whispered, staring at the screen in horror. And so are your accounts, I added, looking at Derek. The moment you attempted to process that forged document, the dead man's switch locked down every financial asset associated with your name. Your credit cards are frozen. Your bank accounts are empty. You are officially bankrupt. The FBI agent stepped forward, The lead agent pulled out a pair of steel handcuffs. Vivian Vance, you are under arrest for corporate espionage, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Derek Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked around Vivian's wrists, her arrogant composure completely collapsed. She screamed, cursing Derek for being a weak, useless fool, confirming everything Maya had recorded. Derek didn't scream, he simply wept, crumbling to the floor in a pathetic display of cowardice. He reached out a trembling hand toward me, begging for mercy, begging for his father. I looked down at the son I had loved, the son who had planned my death for a paycheck. A foundation built on greed will always collapse, I said quietly, offering him no comfort. You chose your path, Derek. Now you must walk it. The fallout was absolute and devastating. Vivian's corporate handlers disavowed her immediately. She faced federal charges that would ensure she spent the next 20 years in a maximum security prison. Blackwatch Industries was hit with a massive federal investigation that resulted in their stock crashing and several key executives being indicted. As for Derek, I utilized a massive team of ruthless corporate lawyers. I didn't send him to federal prison. I did something far worse. Through a brutal plea deal, he avoided jail time, but he was stripped of all wealth, property, and access to Vanguard. As part of his restitution, he was court-ordered to work on the lowest tier of Vanguard's physical security teams, forced to pull night shifts guarding empty warehouses for minimum wage, while I garnished his wages to pay back the legal fees. He would learn the value of hard work, stripped of his unearned privilege. I was granted full, permanent legal custody of Maya, ensuring that she would never again be subjected to the toxic manipulation of her parents. A month later, Maya and I stood on the balcony of my secure downtown penthouse, looking out over the glowing city skyline. She had returned to school, thriving in an environment built on honesty and protection, far away from the toxic manipulation of her parents. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" she asked, leaning against the railing. I put a hand on her shoulder, feeling the strength and resilience that proved the Vanguard legacy wasn't dead. It had just skipped a generation. "I am Maya," I replied, watching the city lights in my life. "I have dismantled terrorist cells, survived hostile environments, and protected empires. But the most dangerous battlefield is always the one inside your own family. Never assume that blood guarantees loyalty. Never let love blind you to the reality of deception. If someone shows you they are willing to destroy you for their own gain, believe them. And then build a trap so flawless, they never even realize they are caught until the cage door locks behind them." Thank you for tuning in to Dad's Real Life Revenge. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment with the number 7 to let me know you stand against toxic family manipulation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Until next time, stay vigilant and always secure your perimeter.